Good afternoon, and thanks for coming to this session. I'm happy to see you all here. Today, what I'd like to do is to try out something on you. I am working on a manuscript right now about the question of liberal education and affection, learning and love. And one of the chapters of the book I'm writing has to do with children, and so I thought this will be the perfect spot to give you a sense of what I'm up to there and to have some time for feedback about the thesis here. What's happened in the book before this chapter, it's kind of a middle chapter, is that I've been talking about what Michael Oakeshott calls the practical mode. Michael Oakeshott was a 20th century British philosopher who I've studied quite a bit and am a great fan of. But Oakeshott thought that there are modes of approaching the world, and some of these modes are history, science, practice, and the aesthetic mode. And the mode we find ourselves living in most of the time is the practical mode, where we have to-do lists, we want to get things done, we want to run through all the things the world is asking us to do. And Oakeshott wants to argue that there are other modes, and especially the aesthetic mode, where we are inclined to wonder. And that children are Oakeshott doesn't talk about this, but I will. Children are inclined to wonder, and that this is something that is very easy to lose as an adult, as we all probably know all too well. So what I'd like to do today is to read you the essay that I am working on, and then at the end to have some time for conversation and questions of anything related to what I've shared here. So even though in the book I will have just criticized the practical mode, I have to admit that I'm very much caught up in it myself. I have not at all mastered the art of living. Indeed, I'm often mastered by the many things that are outside of my control. And perhaps this is why I'm so interested in trying to find a different mode, to use Oakeshott's language, of life. My central philosophical question is prompted by my own life. It is the question of how to balance the competing goods of a desire for excellence and practical accomplishment on the one hand, and the hope of some other better, perhaps we might call it leisured kind of life on the other. I get hints of this other better life at those rare moments when I'm not caught up in the daily business of the world. On a beautiful spring morning while walking the dog, I am struck by the loveliness of an oak tree silhouetted against a pale pink sky and reminded that this beauty is a gift. The tree is a revelation, not something I must trim or treat for oak wilt. It is worthy of contemplation and enjoyment. It hints at something else that lies behind it, something I can't quite name. The most helpful guides in discovering this other kind of experience have been my children. For children are natural contemplatives, as every parent knows. They care nothing at all about self-help or self-improvement because they are not thinking about themselves at all. They are thinking about the marvels they see, often for the first time, in the world around them. I've got a wonderful quote from G.K. Chesterton that I'll share with you. He writes this: "The most unfathomable schools and sages have never attained to the gravity which dwells in the eyes of a baby of 3 months old. It is the gravity of astonishment at the universe. And astonishment at the universe is not mysticism, but a transcendent common sense. The fascination of children lies in this, that with each of them all things are remade, and the universe is again put upon its trial. As we walk the streets and see below us those delightful bulbous heads, 3 times too big for the body, which mark these human mushrooms, we ought always to remember that within every one of these heads there is a new universe, as new as it was on the 7th day of creation. In each of those orbs, there is a new system of stars, new grass, new cities, a new sea." That's Chesterton. For children, everything is new, from the animals at the zoo to characters in books. Just the other night, I was reading in bed alongside my 10-year-old daughter. She quietly closed her book, Peter Pan, and told me how remarkable it was, quote, "that black ink on paper can make such amazing and wonderful images in your mind, and that it can produce such adventure that you can feel like you're in the midst of it." Who among us has not at some time or another felt something like this? We wish we could meet the characters in a book, thereby becoming part of their story, or we feel sad when a book ends and we realize we will hear no more from them. Perhaps we see in a fictional character a model for the kind of person we want to become. Even as my daughter spoke, I realized how long it had been since I had felt what she was describing. For many years, my own reading has been largely in the service of completing projects and required tasks. Outsiders imagine that life in the academy is one of leisure and freedom, but the truth is that I am seldom able to read for pleasure. Even reading in preparation for teaching often seems like work, not leisure. Yet I desperately want my students to enjoy reading and thinking and to understand school not as work, but as play. What has happened to me, I sometimes wonder, and has it happened to everyone else too? I have now taught college students for more than 20 years. I cannot count the number of times I've had the same basic conversation. Often it begins in class when a girl admits she no longer has the same love of reading she did when she was a girl. Or a young man will tell me he used to sit in his bedroom for hours reading for pleasure, but now he can't remember a time that he read something that wasn't assigned. Students have confessed that something happened to them during middle school, something that turned them away from their natural childlike dispositions of delight and wonder. Even though they couldn't have expressed it at the time, all these students heard the message that they were not working hard enough. The adults around them valued grades and accomplishments and were beginning to talk about excellence and college prospects. This is exactly my experience. I loved children's literature and left it behind only gradually, almost imperceptibly. My early picture books gave way to early readers like In a People House and Inside, Outside, Upside Down. And then I read Frog and Toad and Little Bear, the Berenstain Bears, graduating to Ramona and the Bobbsey Twins, some Newbery Award winners, and then to Narnia and Madeleine L'Engle. A family friend gave me a subscription to Cricket magazine. Does anyone remember Cricket? Great. Which was a remarkable literary journal. It was full of short stories written by famous authors, plus lots of high-quality pictures and cartoons. Cricket was something like Harper's or The New Yorker, just designed for children. In all this reading, I did what essayist Walter Bagehot described in a little essay of his called On Early Reading, which was to begin with the whole, regardless of whether or not I was ready for it. Small sciences are the labors of our manhood, observed Bagehot, but the round universe is the plaything of the boy. His fresh mind shoots out vaguely and crudely into the infinite and eternal. Love that quote. Really, I read everything I could get my hands on. As a child in the 1970s, I made frequent trips with my parents to the East Baton Rouge Parish Public Library. The library had been built in 1967 with great pride, but it was the most depressing kind of mid-century civic building. A flat-roofed, tan brick structure, long and low, with vertical concrete slats crowning the exterior and not a single window. Inside, the ceiling had banks of fluorescent lights that illuminated uncomfortable wooden chairs and tables on terrazzo floors. I thought it was beautiful. Back in those distant days before computers, they still used the stamp method in the back cover for checking out books. The card catalog was contained in vast, alphabetized wooden banks of drawers filled with index cards, each drawer with a finger-sized pull. What vital information did those cards convey? I never quite knew, but I did know that every trip to the library was an adventure. Would it be just another installment of Nancy Drew, or would I find something new and special? I often wandered through the stacks in the youth section of the library, where there was usually a female librarian reading to young children. The books were all bound in that sturdy, colorful acrylic library binding that can endure water, food, and all the trials a child might put them through. And they all had that smell, which gave the library its hospitable, musty ambiance. Even now, the smell of an old book transports me back to a time when I would return from the library with a pile of books full of excitement to sit on the couch or lie on my bed and try one book and then another to see which one I liked best. But somewhere along the way, things began to change. Was it inevitable? A hard-headed pragmatist might say that losing our childlike innocence and accepting the ways of the world are simply unavoidable parts of growing up. But I'm not so sure. Part of what happened is that extrinsic rewards were introduced into my education. In the state-of-the-art programmed reading method books we used in the 1970s, students received instant feedback on their reading progress by, wait for this, covering the answers on the page with a bookmark and moving the bookmark down as they progressed through a series of questions. Can you imagine how low-tech that would seem to our own children? It was a way of tailoring the reading assessments to the individual child, which meant the proficient readers could vault forward ahead of the slower students. In my classroom, it became a game to see who had advanced the most and the most quickly. It was also competitive, and there were winners and losers. This transformed reading from an intrinsic good into an activity whose value was concretely measurable. Suddenly, the aim was approbation from others. But as Scott Newstock has written in a wonderful book called How to Think Like Shakespeare, our fixation on test as target, as the end of education itself, shoots an arrow right through the heart of thinking. For when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. I certainly don't agree with everything in Émile, but Jean-Jacques Rousseau is quite right in his admonition to parents and educators. He says this: "Give nature time to work before you take over her business, lest you interfere with her dealings." You assert that you know the value of time and are afraid to waste it. You fail to perceive that it is a greater waste of time to use it ill than to do nothing, and that a child ill-taught is further from virtue than a child who has learned nothing at all. The other thing children have taught me, something I once knew for myself, is the importance of having sovereignty over our experiences. Discovering something for ourselves is infinitely more rewarding than being told what to look for or what one should expect or what to do. And while it is impossible and undesirable to live entirely unfettered by other people, why then would we even need teachers? Nobody enjoys being commanded. A child told to read a particular book will almost always decide to read a different one. Suggesting to your husband that he ought to perform a task is the surest way to get him to ignore it, even if he was inclined to do it before. A good teacher knows this about human nature and will try to take account of it in teaching. If hiking in the woods, therefore, do not advertise the canyon that will soon appear, let the child discover it. Do not point out the frog or the cricket in advance. Allow it to hop on the trail. As one of my students pointed out, there is nothing more depressing than to see a lesson plan in advance of a class. The plan leaves little room for spontaneity, for wonder, for unexpected twists and turns. By definition, it rules out the possibility of an unforeseen destination, making students feel that they are just trudging along the well-worn, dusty paths of others. But to hike in a wilderness that has no path, there is excitement. I know very well that spontaneity, sovereignty, and freedom from the constraints of extrinsic ends can be taken too far. No school can do without tests and assessments. Not all children have a natural desire to learn, maybe, and sometimes they must be compelled. All of this is true and in the nature of things. Nevertheless, my central question still stands. What is lost and unnecessarily lost in this transition from childhood to adulthood? What dampens the natural childlike desire to learn, to contemplate, and to wonder? And what exactly is so wonderful about wondering? I take a turn here and talk about reading together. The simple activity of children and parents reading together is a model for what I am seeking. This activity is governed by love. As Alan Jacobs has observed, for the child in particular, reading is accompanied by an unassailable sense of being loved. It is not constrained by time, except now and then bedtime may oppress, or the parent or the child may be tired. Other people play no part in it. Achievement does not beckon, recognition and assessment are absent. It is an intrinsic good of the most delightful kind. Of course, unless one has a child ready to hand, it's also something that's easy to forget. It was only when I was well into my 30s and had children of my own that I remembered what I had experienced with my own father, who was a devoted reader of books and a creative inventor of bedtime stories. Sometimes the stories were silly. He invented Ramar the elephant, who for a reason I can't recall, squeezed himself into the cargo hold of a plane and flew to India. And sometimes his stories taught lessons. A recurrent character in my childhood was a little girl named Sarah, who always faced two options, and he could either do the right thing, which usually required discipline and self-denial, or the patently obvious wrong thing. My father also read me stories, everything from Dr. Seuss to Aesop, Jerome K. Jerome, and Kipling. In rereading these books with my own children, I had exactly the experience of recollection that essayist William Hazlitt describes in On Reading Old Books. I enjoyed not only the book itself, but the memory of having read it as a child with my own father in my own childhood room. Reading an old favorite, writes Hazlitt, recalls the same feelings and associations which I had in first reading it, and which I can never again have in any other way. Such rereadings provide continuity across the many decades of a life. They are, according to Hazlitt, links in the chain of our conscious being. Again from Hazlitt, they bind together the different scattered divisions of our personal identity. They are landmarks and guides in our journey through life. They are pegs and loops on which we can hang up or from which we can take down, at pleasure, the wardrobe of a moral imagination, the relics of our best affections, the tokens and records of our happiest hours. This activity of reading together resembles other meaningful relationships. It is like the private tutorial between professor and student. It is like a music lesson, you and a teacher working alone with an instrument and score. It is similar, perhaps, to a churchgoer and spiritual director discussing devotional exercises and prayer. In all these cases, the activity is engaged in for its own sake, yet certain goods also come from the activity: knowledge, musical skill, spiritual insight. The same is true when a parent and child read together. The obvious practical benefits of this activity include knowledge of the world and of language. Often children do, in fact, learn how to read, not through drills or study in phonics, but simply by being immersed in reading night after night. But these benefits do not exactly explain why we do it, and I certainly did not anticipate that it would be as rewarding for me as it was for my children. Reading together is a model for the most perfect kind of intellectual friendship. You and another person absorbed in a common text of study and delight. Two people with that eye on the object look. You come to know another person through reading and thinking, and in the conversation that a book generates. It is not just you and another person, it is you and another person and a thing of interest, a triangular kind of relationship. For a child to keep his inborn sense of wonder, he needs the companionship of at least one adult who can share it, rediscovering with him the joy, excitement, and mystery of the world we live in. The most natural phrase in the world is repeated daily on playgrounds everywhere. Mom, look at this. And it also happens when we read together. In obvious ways, the adult must take the lead, selecting the books and doing the reading, at least at first. Much of interest is conveyed in these early books, from the names of objects to the function of prepositions. Many people will remember the wonderful oversized books by Richard Scarry, where each page is covered with small drawings of animals and objects. Some pages convey the ordinary incidents of life, a house with rooms, each with its characteristic function. Bathrooms are for brushing teeth and washing up. Breakfast is prepared in the kitchen. Other pages show all the exciting things that are found in cities, from shops, offices, and monuments to buses and motorcycles. Little boys are especially drawn to the pages of airplanes, cars, and other vehicles. But there are also pages of flowers and plants, musical instruments, and food. Children love to touch these books, to wonder out loud where lowly worm might be going, and to ask parents if things are really like that in the world we all inhabit. In books like these, a child learns the activities and routines of daily life. And there is something about seeing our own lives captured in this humble, poetic way that allows us to understand our own activities differently. Parents remember that all the many things we take for granted, the givens of any ordinary day, must be discovered and learned for the first time by these new entrants to the world. If I were asked, wrote Michael Oakeshott, what constituted the decadence of our current life, I would say it was having lost the opportunity of noticing. With children, we remember how and what to notice. But there is much more to be discovered and appreciated in children's literature. In addition to naming and identifying things, you discover whimsy, humor, morality, and pure delight, not necessarily in that order and not necessarily separately. In the Berenstain Bears series, which many people love to hate, moral lessons are explicit. Children learn not to get in cars with strangers, that they shouldn't eat too much junk food, and that coveting the toys of other children is a bad idea. Other moral tales are just as explicit. In Pig Will and Pig Won't, two brothers offer models for good and bad behavior. Pig Will does what his mother tells him and is rewarded with ice cream and parties. Pig Won't, on the other hand, refuses to obey his mother and suffers boredom and sickness. Ultimately, he changes his ways and is received back into the family's good graces. In the wonderful Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle series, children are miraculously cured of irritating vices, interrupting, selfishness, and tattling, among many others. And of course, there is Maurice Sendak's famous bad boy, Pierre, eaten by a hungry lion for defying his parents. Another category of books captures the lives of children in ways that children and parents can immediately recognize as authentic and true to life. These are the books that look out at the world from the child's perspective. In the Olivia series, children, especially girls, identify with an energetic, headstrong young pig who doesn't like naps or the art of Jackson Pollock. Upon seeing a famous Pollock painting in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Olivia dryly remarks that she could do that in about 5 minutes. The wonderful illustrations of Mo Willems, Knuffle Bunny, Waiting is Not Easy, Elephant and Piggy manage in a few bold strokes to convey deep emotion and humor at once. The famous Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day is a young boy's amusing lament about the small disappointments of daily life, a bad lunch, gum in the hair, and being squished in the back seat during carpool. And sometimes children's books are more like poetry or music. They offer delightful images and words that are not meant merely for moral instruction or to make you laugh. Instead, the focus is on contemplative delight. In a masterpiece of mid-century design, Sparkle and Spin, language appears not as command or information, language merely plays. The book is a meditation on words themselves. quote from the book, what are words? Words are how you think inside comes out. Sorry, words are how what you think inside comes out, and how to remember what you might forget about. Other contemplative books are breathtakingly beautiful. Hello, Lighthouse, Owl Moon, The Little Island. They move child and parent alike to marvel at the mysteries of love, snow, owls, and the ocean. And then I turn to a section on wonder. This is the essence of the experience that I want to examine. This ordinary activity of parent-child reading can offer hints or intimations of a greatness and depth in human experience that is usually overlooked or ignored. It is the basic experience of wondering at the world, an experience that is the foundation for liberal education. As Leon Cass has written, the most ordinary beginnings of thoughtfulness are in wonder or perplexity. We find something in our usually trustworthy experience remarkable, puzzling, or contradictory. A phenomenon or object strikes us in a new or different way, and we wonder why. Many obvious benefits accompany reading, as I've already observed: identification of objects and words, cultivating a sense of humor, and instruction in moral conduct. But children, unlike their parents most of the time, are also great wonderers at things that most of us take for granted. My daughter observes with amazement that a just-served bowl of oatmeal is steaming hot. And I want to say, of course it is. Eat it. But she isn't complaining. She's watching the steam rise in delicate curls from her bowl. She puts a bite in her mouth and becomes, in her words, a fire-breathing dragon. How strange it would be for an adult to act like this, but children do it naturally. Often wonder comes in the form of rhetorical questions. Especially while sitting next to me in the car, my daughter will ask questions that I find impossible to answer. How long do you think it would take to walk to the moon? Why do traffic lights take so long? What is fire? For years, I was obtuse and tried to answer the questions matter-of-factly, but my answers were always inadequate and usually ended up frustrating her or me. One day, recently, she turned to me and said, "Mom, I'm just asking a rhetorical question. I don't really expect an answer." And that's when I realized that she was wondering aloud. She was putting into words the thoughts she had of the strangeness and beauty of the world, at all its ordinary, irritating, and extraordinary things. I was immersed in the practical mode and had not understood her. I was unaccustomed to wondering. Besides, the ordinary, everyday world is frequently not so wonderful. It can seem boring, dull, routine. But philosophers of wonder see things differently. And it turns out you may all know this, but there's a huge literature in the philosophy of wonder. Wonder, these philosophers claim, can arise in vastly different contexts, prompted by a variety of experiences, from awe and amazement at natural beauty, art, or human excellence, to the arrest prompted by any ordinary flower or bird. We can wonder at the extraordinary or the mundane, at things that include our own existence and that of the cosmos. But in wondering, we transfigure these things, making the familiar seem strange, as if seeing the world again through the eyes of a child. There is the fascination, writes author Patrick Sherry, of the known as well as the unknown. The tiny gray sparrow I notice on my walk to the office is as worthy of contemplative attention as the masterwork in a museum. What precisely is the character of this experience? Dutch philosopher Anders Schinkel writes that wonder is essentially a mode of consciousness, or a particular way in which we are aware of the world. Our attention takes the form of an open, receptive stance. We may sometimes be puzzled. Is that a hedgehog or a shoe brush at the doorstep? Sometimes the thing seen or contemplated is in some way strange, beyond our understanding, yet worthy of our attention for its own sake. Or wonder may just be prompted again by that gray sparrow, which we believe we understand fully, until we pause to think again about just what exactly we think we know. The person who wonders or who is inclined to wonder might even be described as having a certain kind of disposition. This person is receptive to experience and attuned to mystery. Ronald Hepburn suggests that wondering goes with humility, compassion, and gentleness. It is the opposite of sophistication, jadedness, and boredom. Wondering asks for a certain vulnerability in one's willingness not to control, but instead to be acted upon, to admire, and even to love. In his journal, Henry David Thoreau recounts what it was like to see a pond in the fall, and I'll just quote from him here. It's beautiful. He says, "I saw Fairhaven Pond with its island, and a strip of perfectly still and smooth water in the lee of the island, and two hawks, fish hawks perhaps, sailing over it. I did not see how it could be improved. Yet I do not see what these things can be. I begin to see such an object when I cease to understand it and see that I did not realize or appreciate it before. But I get no further than this. How adapted these forms and colors to my eye? A meadow and an island. What are these things? Yet the hawks and the ducks keep so aloof, and nature is so reserved. I am made to love the pond and the meadow as the wind is made to ripple the water. Wonder is thus an arrest in the ordinary course of events of life, an occurrence that causes puzzlement and a temporary suspension of practical concerns. It dwells in its objects with rapt attentiveness. It is also an arrest in our normal understanding of time. In wondering, we are concerned not with what may happen in the future, but with the luminous present that is directly in front of us. In fact, wondering may even be described as a welcome loss of self. The child who is delighted at the sparkling icicles that have formed on her favorite tree is lost in the moment and only wants to share it with you. When you look at things like this, writes Evelyn Underhill, you surrender your I-hood. You see things at last as the artist does, for their sake, not for your own. You feel generous, open, and admiring, and most of all, attentive. The philosopher Simone Weil offers perhaps the most compelling vision of what it means to pay attention, and it is both effort and not effort at once. Attention is not willpower, a muscular clenching of the jaw to get us through some detested or difficult task. Instead, attention requires the negative effort of suspending intentional thought, leaving our minds detached, empty, and ready to be penetrated by the object of thought. It is, again, the open receptiveness that Underhill described. We do not, writes Weil, obtain the most precious gifts by going in search of them, but by waiting for them. Is this difficult? Most definitely, yes. She says this, something in our soul has a far more violent repugnance for true attention than the flesh has for bodily fatigue. Nevertheless, she thinks we can cultivate it through study. Teaching, in fact, on her account, should aim at preparing students for such acts of attention that yield an ability to pay attention to objects, ideas, words, and ultimately to other people. In paying attention to others, we see them as objects of wonder, contemplation, and delight. Only then can we console them in their times of affliction, and such consolation is the essence of love. If all of this sounds a bit mystical, it certainly is. It is also countercultural. We are constantly told that we must be doing more and better, and that education consists of filling ourselves, our students, and our children with facts and content. But a wondering, negative, waiting, and receiving offers an alternative way of understanding the purpose as well as the process of education. And I think children have this disposition naturally. And wonder always points beyond itself. What I desire in wonder is not simply a different approach to education, some new technique or pedagogy or set of skills to equip us to get on in the world. Learning how to wonder, to pay attention, is a wholesale repudiation of Oakeshott's practical mode. It sees the world's true richness and even welcomes the loss of self. And I'll conclude with a quote from C.S. Lewis. In reading a fairy tale, observes Lewis, a child's mind has not been concentrated on himself. Fairyland stirs and troubles him to his lifelong enrichment with the dim sense of something beyond his reach, and far from dulling or emptying the actual world, gives it a new dimension of depth. Such reading makes all real woods a little enchanted. This is a special kind of longing. Thank you. I'd be happy to have conversation and questions.